So, as told, my topic is social media used by Dutch development NGOs. My name is already mentioned. I'm linked to two institutions. I'm linked to the Utrecht University of Applied Sciences and Manchester Metropolitan University Business School. The last one, because my PhD supervisor is based there. The first one, because I did a master's there and they advised me, hey, next to your job, you'd better go do a PhD as well. And I like it, to be a part-time PhD student working at the same time in ICT for higher education and enjoying to have a balance between practice and theory. So how did I come to this subject of social media? Actually, this was my observation, offline observation. I was working on my master thesis, at the same time engaging with NGOs, with development NGOs. While I was there, it was clear to me that they were doing something with their mobile devices. They were using their smartphones, they were using their laptops, they were using their tablets, and at the same time, they were doing something social on it. They were tweeting, they were using Facebook, they were using other stuff as well. I wondered what they were doing, so I made this picture and asked him later, what are you doing? And actually I wasn't looking at what he was doing. He was communicating with people across the world, not with only Dutch people, it was in English, with villages in India actually. His organization runs a platform which gives a voice to villages. And so by this observation, my topic arose. Just by accident, a PhD topic arose. What I will be telling to you is what I'm doing now, what I've done. I've conducted a pilot study because I think to know better what I want to do, I'd better go first there, look what is going on, and get a clearer picture of what is happening with social media in this area. And then afterwards, I can refine my research question. How I did this, I will explain. Some of the preliminary findings, which are really preliminary, I have to caution you, it's not that academic yet, it should be done more. And I will be discussing and thinking of what to do further and provide this information to you, so I hopefully you can provide me some feedback on that. Looking at my research problem, it's stated like this. What issues and opportunities do the major Dutch development agencies encounter when using social media to engage their stakeholders with their projects? As you see, I'm not only talking about the positive aspects of using social media, I'm also looking at ways it could have a negative aspect. I try to be neutral in that sense, the observer, and see what's happening there on the ground. To do this, I had to go and talk with organizations. Some pictures of organizations and their websites, their social media presence is shown here. One is actually a kind of micro project platform where communities, local communities, can upload their needs, their mini projects. Let's say projects which have a budget less than 5,000 euros. And on the other side, other people across the world can provide resources, not only financially, but also their brain power or their creativity or in other means. And so, for example, a marketing person, we were just talking offline about marketing, can help to create a good website for this entrepreneur in a local village in Kenya, for example. Or somebody else can help with fundraising to get water pumps in the village or whatever. What you get here is what actually the keynote speaker, Professor Kentaro Toriyama, actually addressed. A local village guy or girl doesn't have that social network. He or she wouldn't reach everyone. Well, actually, this platform can provide a kind of intermediary way of connecting them and getting them connected to people who have, let's say, a broader social network and resources available. I'll skip the other ones due to the lack of time, but it comes back. The approach I took was qualitative, open-minded, not anti-headed, but open-minded, meaning I didn't take a stance theoretically. I looked at it as, okay, these are the observations. Later on, from the observations, the data analysis, I will link it to theories around. And maybe I will link it not to one, but a multitude of theories which could be useful in this sense. So this approach is called grounded theory. You start with the data, all the things, the analysis, the theory is rooted in the data. From there you will build up, and along that road you will constantly compare what is there in the body of knowledge, the literature, and come back to the data, analyze and look whether it applies or not, or is useful or not, and go further and refine. So, key elements are set aside theoretical ideas. The other thing is constant comparison between, let's say, the theory out there, the data here. It has shown its contribution in information science, and in combination with case studies which I conducted, I looked at Dutch development NGOs. Every NGO was one case study. It has been rewarding. Coming back to the topic of my research, social media, a lot has been written about social media, a lot has been said about social media, or sometimes people call it Web 2.0, social networks. There are even other terms coined. All of them have some similarities. They share these characteristics: openness, participation, connectedness, and community. Looking further in what social media can mean in the context of development, Zuniga and White have said it's being used for connecting, collaborating, creating and sharing, but also for finding, using, reusing actually also, and organizing stuff. As I mentioned before, the grounded theory approach means you start with the data. You get some data, first slice. You try to analyze the data, which is tough, I have to admit, the first time as a novice in this field, and try to code it, open coding. Open-minded, open coding. Afterwards, all these codes are categorized. And then the last thing what you do is you will look at properties and also relationships between them. Next to it, after the first time you did it, you will try to find, let's say, more data which is relevant for the things you find in this data. For example, a certain theme will arise. Well, instead of going back blindly, randomly, you will purposefully go further and look at a theme. Sample will be done according to that, trying to find more about that theme. So therefore it's called theoretical sampling. And furthermore, you will also link to the body of knowledge, looking at literature which is written about this. Okay? After doing this multiple times, a picture, a story will more or less emerge. I think that's the best word to say, a storyline. There should be a narrative. Some people would say a framework. I personally believe more in a narrative. And if that narrative is clear enough and full enough, this cycle has been saturated. And you can come to, let's say, a kind of grounded theory, where there is a relationship between the things you have found in categories. One step back. As Professor Toyama already said, don't focus too much on technology. As a professional and working in ICT for higher education and research in healthcare, the first thing I always did was having a cup of coffee or tea with people. Didn't talk about technology, that was the second thing I did. The first thing was get to know each other personally, trust building. That professional experience I'm using in my research approach as well. The thing I first did already in 2010 was talking with all these NGOs, letting them know who the talent is, that they can rely on this guy. At the same time, if they have something they don't know and I know, I can contribute back to them. Trust building is essential. In my opinion, it's the key element, step 0, for a researcher or for any professional. If you haven't done that, it will be more difficult to get all the data later. So what I did first is offline, get in touch with people from these NGOs. Afterwards, when I found information useful for them about this topic, social media for development, I shared it. I used Facebook group, as Rizwan has mentioned. It has attracted many users already across the world. I have made a Scoopit page. I'm tweeting it quite a lot about things I found. And many times I'm making kind of balance between things which are, let's say, clickable, things what practitioners want, and things what are more academic. Because I know the audience is mixed as well. So you have to use and adapt your tone of voice on the audience. So once again, using social media as a researcher is, I think, right now in this century, quite important, can be useful. Besides, I think I would be a failed researcher if I wouldn't have used social media while talking about social media. My pilot study consists of 5 cases. Those cases are actually Dutch development NGOs. They are anonymized, and they were actually also used for my Master of Research phase in the UK, which is, let's say, the first full-time year of the PhD. The product was a mini dissertation, and actually what you see here are bits and pieces of that mini dissertation. Those organizations had multiple themes. One was focused on water, sanitation for water. Another one was on crowdsourcing. Actually, I showed you the picture already. And phone usage for education, but also for healthcare. The fourth was had multitude of themes, so I called it confederated, and they operated like a confederation, not one single body. And the last one was looking at traumatized children. These NGOs, for these NGOs, I interviewed people. I used a semi-structured approach. These interviews, combined with their social media communication, combined with web pages and other reports they had, brought me to this analysis. You see here something you can't read probably from that distance, but I will explain to you. Everything was coded. All pieces of text, pictures, all these things, tweets, I interpreted and came back to this coding, open coding as it's called. After that, I tried to make groups clustered these codes. More or less 3 things emerged more or less from this. The 3 themes are perception of social media, I'll explain later, applying to social media practice, and identifying various risks of social media. Actually, these themes more or less occurred in all the cases. There was only one case where one of the themes wasn't mentioned totally. What I mean with perception of social media is actually how do the people in these NGOs think of social media? How do they define? I don't mean the academic definition, the correct definition. What is their idea? So that's what I mean. Applying social media to practice means how do they use it in everyday life, in their development projects, in their communication with other stakeholders. And identifying barriers or risks of social media is what did they mention to me about, let's say, the negative aspects they identify with the use of social media. I'll give one example for each of the cases. Due to the lack of time, I won't go to all of them. But one example of perception of social media is what I coded up-to-date appearance, meaning the respondent said, social media is like a shopping window in a mall. It needs to be maintained to attract attention. This respondent more or less stated that it took a lot of time for this organization to be up to date, renew all the pages, refresh everything, and to put the relevant information out there. What I found in looking at this theme of perception of social media is that more or less all the organizations find collaboration an important characteristic of social media. Something else what was mentioned was called International Cooperation 2.0, or let's say where Web 2.0 technologies are more or less fused with development studies thinking. Thank you. Is it total or is it final? Okay, thank you. I asked you for 5 minutes. So I will just skip a few things. The literature, what I found, more or less confirms my findings, or the findings confirm the literature. Not really special things. Looking at applying social media in practice, one example here is that one NGO made the mistake of using the SMS code 666 in Uganda, which is a terrible mistake. Some people know probably why. The number of the beast, Christian belief. So it's not a good thing to use that. You learn from mistakes. So you can learn from mistakes. All the NGOs try to do a bit of monitoring and analyzing. They use quite a lot these social media for crowdsourcing, crowdfunding. And some of them say, hey, we don't know what the best practice is with social media, so we should try an experiment. So room for experiment is there as well. Again, most of my findings, more or less actually everything, confirms what is out there written. Last but not least, risks associated with social media. One of the key things what was mentioned was reputation damage. Other thing was oversimplifying the message. As you know, Twitter has only 144 characters. In that little bit, you have to convey a message. Some organizations find it difficult to explain the social complexity of development in 144 characters. And therefore, they don't use it. Once again, I found things confirming the literature. Due to the lack of time, I will skip this. I'll come back right away to the thing which is most essential. There are, let's say, 3 themes. Between the themes, I have identified elements of which you would say relationships, influencing the one to the other. Identifying barriers and risks influences characterization of social media. Characterization of social media motivates social media practice. Risks also shape the way social media is being used. This is just a preliminary result. It shows some errors. Actually, right now, I have done more research, I've done more interviews, I have more information, and I can confirm you, I will be leaving this preliminary framework, and some things will be changed, like it will be arrowed in 2 ways. For example, this one. So this is preliminary, but it's just a starting point for me to go further and dig down further and get, let's say, that thing which is a PhD research, a topic which is manageable in the next 4 years. As I said, it is a basis for my research. I have looked at literature which can guide me. I still need, let's say, a kind of theoretical lens which can guide me further and pinpoint and narrow down the things. So I found some remarks from the keynote speaker today very interesting and useful for me to have, let's say, more critical approach towards the subject. And I will be reformulating my research problem to pinpoint it and to narrow down this. So I leave it to this, and I hope there is room for questions.
Yeah.
Thank you.